The Stormlight Archive is an epic fantasy series by the author Brandon Sanderson. Set in the war-torn world of Roshar, a land battered by magical storms and home to a variety of nations, cultures, and mystical forces, the series follows a large cast of characters as they navigate political intrigue, personal conflict, and a looming cosmic war. The story weaves together themes of leadership, redemption, and the nature of power, all while introducing a unique magic system centered around the physical property called Stormlight, weapons called shard blades, and the complex arcane mechanic of surge binding. The Stormlight Archive has quickly centered itself as a cornerstone of modern fantasy. So, Stormlight is a lot of things. Each book is over 1,000 pages long, and with 5 books already out, it's only halfway done. In those thousands of pages, Sanderson has the time to cover a lot of topics: war, redemption, betrayal, religion, culture, history, environmentalism, memory, regret, and 100 other ideas, both societal and personal. To put it succinctly, the Stormlight Archive is brilliant, and it's a perfect example of how to cover complex political topics in a fantastical setting. Why put it off? Race and racism is a topic both taboo to speak about and yet ingrained in almost all aspects of our media. This has resulted in many allegorical depictions of race in fictional worlds. Unfortunately, most of them are shit. Take Zootopia, a blockbuster animated film that so many people rush to praise due to its allegorical depiction of modern-day race relations using carnivores and herbivores. Now, anyone with 2 brain cells can figure out how using different animal species as an allegory for race can be problematic. Zootopia completely misses the mark by treating race as a biological reality rather than a societal construct. The film's metaphor relies on the idea that different species, predators and prey, are inherently distinct in nature, with physical and behavioral traits that define them. However, in the real world, race is not a scientific or biological category, but a social and historical construct created to justify systems of power and oppression. By equating race with species, Zootopia unintentionally reinforces the false and dangerous notion that race differences are rooted in biology rather than being arbitrary distinctions. This misstep leads to troubling implications. If we follow Zootopia's logic, the historical oppression of certain groups stems from fear of their innate capabilities, rather than from centuries of deliberate social, economic, and political marginalization. In reality, race has no genetic basis. There's more genetic variation within so-called racial groups than between them. But in Zootopia, the prey majority's fear of predators is shown to be at least partially justified, as some predators do revert to a dangerous state. While this state is caused by those seeking to divide these 2 groups, the fact that this state can be created in the first place is a completely different notion to the idea of what race actually is. This completely undercuts the film's supposed anti-racist message by suggesting that discrimination is rooted in a real biological difference. One of the most praised scenes in the film is where a rabbit and her child move away from a tiger on the subway. But I'm sorry, it's a fucking tiger. A rabbit has a biological reason to be afraid, whereas white people aren't born with a fear of black people. It's something that they are taught. Instead of challenging the myths that sustain racial prejudice, Zootopia inadvertently upholds them, making its allegory not just flawed, but actively counterproductive. Bright is a 2007 film starring Will Smith that, while much worse of a film than Zootopia, has just as bad of a race allegory. What grinds my gears is that this movie got slammed for its allegories, but Zootopia has gotten off mostly scot-free. Bright exchanges black people in the inner city as orcs, a fantasy race often depicted as savage brutes. What the fuck is this trying to say? That not all black people hunger for our flesh? This racial allegory, once again, is completely counterproductive, and stems in the idea that different races are actually different species. The Harry Potter series attempts to depict prejudice through the concept of blood purity, with pure-blood wizards discriminating against Muggle-borns and non-magical beings. Discrimination in Harry Potter is primarily represented through Voldemort and his Death Eaters, making it seem like oppression is caused by a few bad individuals rather than a deeply entrenched system. While blood purity is condemned, the series does not explore how these biases are upheld within institutions within the wizarding world, and very ultimately, Harry Potter treats prejudice as an external evil to be defeated rather than an internalized systematic issue to be dismantled, making it a weak race allegory. The Legend of Korra Season 1 introduced the Equalists, a movement arguing that non-benders are oppressed in a society where elemental bending grants significant advantages. This setup has the potential to explore systemic inequality, but sadly the show undercuts its own premise in several ways. The show establishes that Republic City is ruled largely by benders, and its police force is dominated by metal benders, and that non-benders struggle to gain political power. However, instead of exploring these inequalities, the show dismisses them as exaggerated grievances and presents the main threat as non-benders rising up. Amon, the Equalist leader, is ultimately revealed to be a bender himself, implying that the movement is built on deception rather than real grievances. This delegitimizes the concerns of non-benders and suggests that those who challenge the status quo are untrustworthy extremists. By making the Equalists the villains and having Korra, a privileged bender, restore the system rather than reforming it, The Legend of Korra reinforces the idea that marginalized groups should accept their place in society rather than fight for change. Instead of engaging with class struggle or systemic oppression, The Legend of Korra frames demands for equality as dangerous and misguided. The problem with all of these is that they fail to understand one simple thing. Race isn't real.
No, that's not an opinion, it's a fact.
There's no impactful difference between anyone of any race. We are all the same species with basically all the same pros and cons. Making a race allegory by making the difference important undercuts the frustratingly stupid part about racism, which is that it's not built on anything real. Race is based largely on cosmetics. So, what does Brandon Sanderson do? One of the most overt ways the Stormlight Archive examines race is through the light eyes, dark eyes divide in Alethi society. Alethi people are socially stratified based on eye color, with light eyes occupying the nobility and ruling class, while dark eyes are relegated to a lower status class. When I first read this, I thought, oh my god, this is the most basic, brain-dead allegory on race. And it is. But think about what hereditary, cosmetic trait other than skin pigmentation you could use. There really isn't one. By reframing race through eye color, it's easier to see the pointlessness of the Alethi caste system because we don't already have a systemic idea of skin color. Dark eyes face legal and systemic oppression, with restricted career paths, harsher punishments for crimes, and limited social mobility. Light eyes, even those of lower rank, have inherent privileges that grant them authority over dark eyes. Many dark eyes accept their lower status because they have been raised to see it as the natural order. One of the main characters, Kaladin, for example, initially believes that light eyes are inherently superior and only later begins to question the system he was raised in. The combination of caste and gender further complicate oppression, as women of Alethi society face additional restrictions based on eye color. The intersection of gender and race in Alethi society can also result in strange freedoms. In the second book, Shallan transforms into a dark-eyed woman named Vale, and when she is out in an informal guise, she feels comfortable uncovering her safe hand. More on safe hands later. Her new lower class status allows her to escape a gender restriction she suffered when she was an elite. Race isn't just a black and white, privileged, unprivileged line. It's complicated, and not all rules exist in all spaces. Unlike many fantasy stories that use race allegories in a simplistic way, the Stormlight Archive understands the core lie that race is built on and exposes its pointlessness. It does not merely portray racism as personal bigotry, it shows how entire social and political systems reinforce and sustain inequality. Colonialism is a system of domination in which one nation or group exerts control over another, often through military force, economic exploitation, and cultural suppression. Historically, it has involved powerful empires seizing land, resources, and labor from indigenous peoples, justifying their actions through ideologies of racial and cultural superiority. While traditional colonialism often took the form of direct rule, such as the British Empire's control over India or the European partition of Africa, its effects persist today in the form of neo-colonialism, where economic and political pressures continue to enforce global inequities. Colonialism is not just about conquest. It reshapes entire societies, erasing languages, histories, and traditions while imposing new systems that benefit the colonizers. James Cameron's Avatar presents an obvious allegory for colonialism, with the human military-industrial complex invading Pandora to exploit its resources at the expense of the indigenous Na'vi. The film effectively critiques corporate greed and military expansionism, but does through a well-worn white savior narrative. Jake Scully, a white outsider, not only joins the Na'vi resistance, but ultimately becomes their leader, reinforcing the idea that indigenous people need an enlightened outsider to guide them. This diminishes the agency of the Na'vi and turns their struggles into Jake's personal quest for redemption. While Avatar delivers a visceral anti-colonial message, it simplifies history into a binary of evil colonizers and noble savages, sidestepping the more complex realities of colonial resistance. Neil Blomkamp's District 9 uses science fiction to explore apartheid South Africa, with the alien prawn standing in for black South Africans. This film succeeds in portraying the dehumanization of marginalized peoples and the violence of forced displacement. However, it also falls into the trap of making its protagonist a white bureaucrat, the emotional center of the story. His transformation into an alien, while narratively compelling, shifts the focus away from the oppressed group's own perspective, making the metaphor less about systemic injustice and more about one man's personal reckoning with it. On the other hand, the animated series Avatar: The Last Airbender presents one of the most thoughtful depictions of colonialism in popular media. The Fire Nation's expansionism mirrors real-world Japanese imperialism. The series excels in showing how colonialism affects different societies in unique ways. The Earth Kingdom struggles with occupation and collaboration. The Southern Water Tribe faces near genocide, and the air nomads are wiped out entirely. Unlike many other stories, Avatar highlights resistance movements, internal dissent within the Fire Nation, and the long-term scars of conflict. While it simplifies history to fit a simplistic narrative, it avoids the white savior trope by centering indigenous and non-Western perspectives. R.F. Kuang's Poppy War trilogy delivers one of the most brutal and historically grounded portrayals of colonialism in modern fiction. Drawing from real events like the Opium Wars and China's involvement in World War II, the novel does not romanticize resistance or simplify oppression. Instead, it examines how colonial violence begets further violence, forcing its protagonists to make morally devastating choices. Kuang critiques Western imperialism, but also delves into the complexities of internalized colonialism, showing how oppressed groups can become oppressors themselves. The Stormlight Archive offers a nuanced and morally complex depiction of colonialism, avoiding many of the problematic trends seen in other fantasy stories. Rather than reducing colonialism to its simple struggle versus good and evil, Sanderson explores its deep-seated structures, showing how conquest, cultural erasure, and systemic oppression shape societies long after the initial act of colonization. Through the histories of Urshar's various nations, especially conflicts between the Alethi and the singers or listeners, and the conquered people of the Makabaki or Reshi, Sanderson crafts a powerful allegory that interrogates the nature of power, imperialism, and resistance. One of the most common pitfalls in colonial narratives is the white savior trope, where an outsider from the oppressive group becomes the hero who liberates the oppressed. The Stormlight Archive consciously avoids this, particularly in the relationship between Alethi and the Singers. While characters like Dalinar Kholin struggle with their past as colonizers, they are not framed as the ultimate saviors of the oppressed. Their support is vital to the movement, but it is still just a piece of the larger puzzle. Instead, the Singers themselves, particularly figures like Venli and Leshwi, lead their own fight for autonomy. Like in many resistances, there is infighting, and justice can transform into revenge. Sanderson ensures that the oppressed are given agency, which also means the agency to be complex and sometimes misguided. Rather than portraying colonialism as the result of one singular villain or empire, Sanderson examines it as a systemic force that persists across generations. There is no one character who represents the system of oppression for the righteous heroes to strike down and metaphorically end the problem. The Alethi conquest of the Singers is not a simple case of military invasion. It is a long, painful process of cultural domination, forced assimilation, and historical revisionism. The Singers' own history has been largely erased, even with their name replaced by the derogatory term Parshman. Most of Urshar's inhabitants see them as a servile race, unaware of their true heritage due to generations of oppression. This mirrors real-world histories where colonized peoples have been stripped of their language, traditions, and even knowledge of their own past. Another strength of the Stormlight Archive is its exploration of how colonialism affects both the oppressors and the oppressed on a personal level. The Singers struggle with internalized oppression. Many have accepted the roles forced upon them, and reclaiming their identity is a painful and complicated process. Venli, for example, undergoes immense guilt as she grapples with the consequences of resisting the Alethi while also trying to protect her people. What is brilliant about the history of the Stormlight Archive is that the Alethi and all other human groups in the story came from another world. This took place thousands of years ago, and it's not like they can just pack up and go back home. This is a great parallel to real-world colonization. The United States can't just give back the entire country to native groups. Firstly, because many native tribes have been completely wiped out, and secondly, because there is already a lot here. Hundreds of years of history have been tangled up in colonial nations from the stolen land of native populations. So everyone is just kind of stuck in a terrible and complex relationships. So just like the Alethi and the Singers, they need to work together within the land and history they sadly have to deal with. Many stories about colonialism conclude with a neat resolution where the oppressed reclaim their freedom and the colonizers either repent or are defeated. Stormlight Archive, however, recognizes that colonial legacies do not disappear overnight. Even as the Singers reclaim their identity and autonomy, the scars of their oppression remain. The humans, too, struggle with their own role in perpetuating cycles of violence. The novel does not offer easy answers, but instead asks its characters and its readers to confront uncomfortable truths about history, justice, and responsibility. The Stormlight Archive presents one of the most nuanced and respectful portrayals of dissociative identity disorder in fiction through the character of Shallan Devar. Rather than using her condition as a plot device or a source of shock, Sanderson integrates her DID into her journey in a way that feels authentic and emotionally resonant. Shallan's DID stems from severe childhood trauma, her abusive father, the murder of her mother, and the overwhelming burdens placed on her young shoulders. In response, she unconsciously creates alternate identities, or alters, to help her cope with situations she couldn't otherwise handle. This mirrors real-world understandings of DID, where alters form to compartmentalize pain and stress. Shallan's alters, Veil, Radiant, and others, serve distinct functions. Veil represents her confident, street-smart side, Radiant a composed and disciplined warrior. These altars aren't gimmicks or supernatural quirks, but important parts of Shallan's identity, shaped by her need for protection. They also exist beyond her trauma. Vale, for example, is a fan-favorite character, with a great sense of humor and a vital bond to Shallan independent from her tragic origin. Unlike many portrayals of DID, the Stormlight Archive avoids demonizing or sensationalizing the disorder. Shallan is never seen as dangerous or unstable, and her condition isn't a twist or trope. But it's also not harmless. It's depicted as painful yet powerful. Her journey focuses on understanding and accepting her alters, not rejecting them. Her struggles with memory gaps, disorientation, and self-doubt are handled with empathy, reflecting the challenges real people face. Her relationships, especially with Adolin, show the value of support. Adolin doesn't try to fix her, he accepts her entirely, demonstrating that healing means living with trauma, not erasing it. Shallan's DID becomes a moving allegory for self-acceptance. Her story is not about becoming whole in a conventional sense, but about embracing all parts of herself, even those shaped by pain. Szeth's son Valano is one of the most compelling portrayals of spiritual abuse I've ever seen. His arc shows the psychological and moral toll of being forced to commit atrocities under religious manipulation. Branded trueless by his people, the Shin, Szeth is condemned for stating that the Night's radiance have returned. His people's religious beliefs force them to reject this reality and sentence him to eternal servitude. This isn't just punishment, it's spiritual abuse, using faith to strip Szeth's autonomy and break him mentally. He becomes a tool, internalizing the belief that he deserves his suffering. Unlike other fantasy assassins, Szeth is tormented by his actions but cannot resist them. He fears disobedience would damn him further, showing the deep psychological grip of his indoctrination. Under Taravangian, he remains trapped in self-loathing, seeing his pain as righteous divine punishment. His disassociation and numbness mirror real-world trauma from religious coercion. His turning point comes with Nail, a herald bound to rigid justice. Szeth learns that justice without morality is tyranny, and true healing means reclaiming his agency, not trading one master for another. Choosing to wield Nightblood, a sword that demands judgment but offers no clear guidance, symbolizes his recovery. Unlike his previous object, the Oathstone, Nightblood forces Szeth to choose, marking his path from blind obedience toward true moral autonomy. Now it's time for my favorite sad boy, Kaladin Stormblessed. Kaladin's depression stems from trauma loss and a feeling of overwhelming responsibility. Despite his immense power, he feels powerless, consumed by guilt and self-blame. His depression cannot be fixed by his extraordinary abilities. If anything, his powers make it harder for him to heal. His struggles illustrate how depression can trap someone emotionally. Kaladin's inner turmoil is a stark reminder that mental illness isn't a personal flaw, but a deeply debilitating force, affecting every aspect of your life. At his lowest points, Kaladin contemplates suicide to escape the emotional weight of his grief. These moments are raw, showing how depression can lead to the most desperate of thoughts. Sanderson doesn't romanticize these thoughts, but portrays them as a tragic consequence of mental illness. As a reader, you want Kaladin to get better, but you understand exactly why he's thinking this way. But Kaladin's suicidal ideation reveals how depression distorts self-worth, making individuals feel like burdens to others. Kaladin's path toward healing is shaped by the support he receives from others. His bond with Syl, his spren, helps him reconnect with his sense of purpose. Though she can't cure his depression, she helps him find meaning in his pain. Similarly, his friends in Bridge 4 provide an environment where he can begin healing at his own pace, underscoring the importance of patience, understanding, and human connection in coping with mental illness. Kaladin's decision to continue fighting, despite his depression, is central to his character arc. His journey isn't about completely overcoming his depression, but about choosing to live with it. His decision to press on, even in the face of despair, highlights the resilience needed to survive. Calden's story demonstrates that healing is an ongoing process, and that survival can be a victory in of itself. Calden's portrayal of depression and suicide is one of the most honest and empathetic in fantasy. Sanderson doesn't resolve his struggles quickly, but instead shows the ongoing nature of mental health recovery. Renarin Colin offers a nuanced and respectful portrayal of autism, avoiding harmful stereotypes while showcasing the complexity of neurodivergence. He struggles with social cues and emotional situations, leading to misunderstandings, especially with his father Dalinar and his brother Adolin. These challenges reflect the isolation many autistic individuals face. Sanderson presents Renarin's struggles as part of who he is, not flaws, but facets of a capable and multidimensional character. Renarin's quiet, introspective, emotional expression often leads others to see him as distant, though he feels deeply for everyone around him. His bond with his friend Gliss symbolizes how autistic individuals may rely on strategies to manage emotional overload. His intelligence and ability as a truth watcher highlight neurodivergent strengths such as focus and pattern recognition. Unlike his more traditionally heroic brother, Renarin's value lies in his unique perspective and analytical mind. A central part of his journey is self-acceptance. Initially overshadowed, Renarin learns to embrace his differences and recognize his contributions. His growth shows that heroism isn't defined by societal norms. He becomes a powerful role model for neurodivergent readers, affirming that being different doesn't diminish your worth or potential. The Stormlight Archive has some of the best literary representations of neurodivergence and mental illness I've ever seen. This is because Sanderson approaches all his characters from a place of understanding and empathy, unwinding their minds to figure out why they do what they do, and not judging them for it. None of his characters' feelings are depicted as silly or childish. All of their experiences are valid and important by themselves. In modern fantasy, depictions of gender and sexuality have become increasingly important as readers and audiences seek more inclusive and nuanced portrayals of such identities. While some works of fantasy embrace progressive, multifaceted representations, others fall short of accuracy or thoughtfully addressing these issues. George R. R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire offers a complex portrayal of gender and sexuality within a brutal medieval world. Women like Daenerys Targaryen and Cersei Lannister must navigate patriarchal systems to achieve power, and their journeys are portrayed with great nuance. Martin doesn't present them merely as victims, but as individuals shaped by and responding to systematic constraints, personal ambition, and political pressures. Arya Stark, for instance, subverts traditional gender roles by rejecting conventional femininity in pursuit of her own vengeance and justice. But Cersei Lannister is one of the most complex female characters in all of fantasy, and it's her I want to focus on. As a self-hating woman and female misogynist, Cersei internalizes the very structures that oppress her. Her distorted view of herself and other women reflects how societal gender roles are absorbed and reproduced, offering a darkly compelling critique of patriarchy. Sexuality is similarly nuanced. Martin includes LGBTQ characters like Renly Baratheon and Loras Tyrell, whose relationship is treated with great emotional sensitivity.
Is there a purpose that I had for making the characters gay? Well, I've noticed that there are gay people in the world.
Brienne of Tarth, whose gender expression and desires defy easy categorization, embodies how identity intersects with themes of honor, isolation, and personal acceptance. These characters are not reduced to their sexuality or gender, but are fully integrated into the narrative, showing how these aspects influence their standing in a rigidly hierarchical society. Martin's queer characters are placed in a historically grounded context. Their identities must be read between the lines, much like how queerness is often obscured in historical narratives. The dynamic between Renly and Loras, for example, echoes the trope of historical figures being remembered as just close friends. This subtly reflects how both the realities of repression and the endurance of queer identity in unlikely spaces. In the Stormlight Archive, Brandon Sanderson uses the concept of the safe hand to explore and critique gender roles in Rasharan society. The safe hand, a cloth used to cover a woman's left hand, serves as a potent symbol of modesty, propriety, and the broader societal restrictions placed on women. This cultural artifact highlights how gender roles shape identity, freedom, and relationships in Rashar. It reinforces traditional views of femininity, serving as a visible marker of the expectations women must meet to be respected, and it becomes a tool of world building that establishes the rigidity of gender norms. The safe hand's symbolic weight is most evident in the lives of the series' female characters like Shallan and Yasna. Shallan early in the series feels confined by the expectations imposed on her as a highborn woman. Her discomfort with the safe hand and her subtle efforts to reject or ignore it mirrors her desire to push back against societal limitations. As she grows, the safe hand becomes not just a garment, but a symbol of the roles she must challenge to find autonomy and self-understanding. Yasna Kholin, in contrast, offers a more overt challenge to gender expectations. As a scholar and political figure, she refuses to let tradition define her, yet even she is not immune to societal scrutiny. Through Yasna, Sanderson shows how patriarchal constraints persist, even for powerful women. Her defiance underscores the tension between personal strength and societal judgment. By using the safe hand as a recurring symbol, Sanderson critiques the patriarchal structures that underpin Rasharan society. The safe hand represents an attempt to control and limit women, reflecting how identity and agency are shaped by external expectations. Yet Sanderson also shows that women can resist these roles. Through Shallan's inner rebellion and Yasna's outward defiance, the Stormlight Archive reveals how women challenge and subvert oppressive norms, asserting their own autonomy within a rigid structure. One of the most notable aspects of the Stormlight Archive's treatment of queer characters is its avoidance of sensationalizing their identities. Sanderson doesn't frame characters' sexualities as central plot points, instead allowing them to exist naturally within the broader narrative. This challenges traditional portrayals in fantasy literature, where LGBTQ identities are often emphasized or used as plot devices. In the Stormlight Archive, queer characters like Drehi are included in a matter-of-fact way. Their identities are neither explained nor justified. They simply exist as part of Roshar's social fabric. Sanderson's subtle approach avoids dramatizing or stereotyping, instead presenting queerness as one aspect of a fully developed character. This signals a broader shift in speculative fiction, where queer identities are acknowledged without dominating a character's arc. Roshar itself is not bound by strict heteronormative rules. Interactions between characters of various genders unfold organically, without feeling forced or tokenized. Queer characters have agency and occupy roles of influence, leaders, warriors, scholars, rather than being sidelined. By integrating diverse sexualities without fanfare, Sanderson avoids stereotypes and presents queerness as part of everyday life. In the film The Help, the central character is a young white journalist who seeks to tell the stories of black domestic workers in 1960s Mississippi. Through her journey, the film positions the audience, especially white viewers, as stands-in for the journalist herself, as she begins to recognize the racial injustices around her and decides to challenge the status quo. The film's structure hinges on her personal growth, her moral awakening to the racism inherent in the lives of the black maid she works with. While she does indeed help bring attention to the maid's stories, her character becomes the vehicle for the white audience to understand the issues of race rather than presenting the struggles of black women as the focal point. This narrative choice can be seen as problematic because it diminishes the agency of the film's black characters, reducing their complex experiences of racism to mere backdrops for the main character's development. By making the white protagonist perspective the dominant one, The Help inadvertently suggests that the burden of understanding and confronting racism doesn't fall on those watching the film, as they have achieved a sense of moral superiority by understanding the message of the work. The Help doesn't challenge the opinions of its white audience. It reinforces their idea that they are good allies and don't need to look inward to address their own failings. The film can also be critiqued for portraying a simplistic resolution, where a white character's actions are depicted as the key to progress instead of exploring deeper, more systematic changes that could address racial inequality.
These last few weeks. And I know the doctor says it's some kind of last strength nonsense, but I have decided not to die.
In the Stormlight Archive, Brandon Sanderson notably avoids using traditional audience stand-ins, a common narrative device where a character represents the perspective of the audience, usually guiding them through the world and offering a sense of moral clarity. Instead, Sanderson places the reader directly into the experiences of a diverse array of characters, each with their own complex identities, struggles, and arcs. By doing this, Sanderson shifts the focus away from a singular external perspective, often privileged, and centers the experiences of individuals who may not serve as a window for the audience, but are fully fleshed out characters in their own right. This narrative choice allows the series to explore themes of identity, trauma, and social structure with nuance, encouraging readers to empathize with and understand a variety of perspectives without oversimplifying or relying on a character to fully represent them. One of the most striking features of the Stormlight Archive is its ensemble cast. The story doesn't hinge on a single protagonist who acts as a surrogate for the reader. Rather, it offers a wide variety of characters, each with distinct motivations, flaws, and perspectives. Characters like Kaladin, Shallan, Dalinar, and Yasna all have their own story arcs that explore different aspects of their experiences, from depression and trauma to issues with leadership, morality, and power. These characters come from diverse backgrounds and are placed in morally gray situations where they must navigate complex choices, challenging readers to engage with their stories on a deeper level rather than a simple black or white distinction. Rather than positioning any one character as a stand-in for the audience, Sanderson ensures that the reader becomes a part of the character's individual experiences. Kaladin's battle with depression, Shallan's struggle with identity, and Dalinar's pursuit of redemption all represent personal struggles that readers must engage in on their own terms, rather than being led through the process by a character to guide them. Sanderson's approach to avoiding audience stand-ins also comes through in his commitment to representing diverse ideas that go beyond the traditional hero's journey with a single protagonist. For example, Kaladin is a Dark Eyes, which introduces readers to the stark realities of a rigid social hierarchy that privileges the nobility. His arc highlights themes of inequality and the dehumanizing effects of class systems, while also exploring his own internalized prejudices against others, especially light-eyed individuals. Kaladin's journey doesn't simply idealize these complex dynamics, but instead forces readers to reckon with how privilege and oppression shape his worldview, his relationships, and his identity. By avoiding audience stand-in characters, Sanderson challenges readers to go beyond a simple identification with a character, and instead encourages a deep empathy and personal reckoning. When a reader is asked to see the world through Kaladin's eyes or to understand Shallan's fractured psyche, they are not being guided through a simplified narrative designed to evoke a specific response. Instead, they are invited to walk in the shoes of characters whose lives are multifaceted and whose struggles are not easily resolved or identified with. This approach elevates the emotional and intellectual stakes of the story because it requires readers to engage with characters as individuals, not as symbols of any particular worldview or social issue. Another key aspect of this is the Stormlight Archive's focus on the larger societal and institutional systems that affect its characters, rather than reducing the issues they face to mere personal decisions. The struggles Kaladin faces as a Dark Eyes in a rigid class system, the weight of leadership and morality on Dalinar's shoulders, and the societal pressures of women like Shallan all point to broader societal dynamics at play. Instead of using a singular character to explain or resolve these systemic issues, Sanderson allows the complexity of these structures to unfold through the experiences of individual characters. So how did a Mormon cishet white guy from Lincoln, Nebraska end up writing one of the most inclusive and socially minded fantasy series of all time? I think this stems from two qualities that I think all great progressive artists have. Firstly, Sanderson's books are filled with characters who themselves are learning. Almost all of the main characters in his stories know very little from the outset. They spend their time in the story learning and having their own beliefs challenged. This is likely a reflection of Sanderson's own life, figuring out that the world is much more complex than you originally taught. This also helps guide the reader into questioning their own implicit biases and what they believe are true, and whether or not that is the case. Secondly, Sanderson is willing to do his research if he doesn't know something. For Shallan, Sanderson consulted experts on dissociative identity disorder to make sure his depiction was accurate. Brandon Sanderson is a prime example of the fact that anyone can write well about anything as long as they are willing to put in the time to learn. Brandon is able to ask questions, not settle for simple answers, and then figure out the complex reasons behind problems. This is where Stormlight's massive length aids Sanderson. With hundreds of pages to fill, Brandon can take time to lay out his world and characters without simplifying to save time. Sanderson is willing to get into the dirt and make his readers think and challenge their own assumptions, which is what makes the Stormlight Archive one of the most socially minded series of all time.